top FBI lawyer admits she didn't read Trump's spy warrant before signing it. The senior FBI lawyer who signed off on the FISA warrant to spy on Donald Trump's campaign advisor, Carter Page, has admitted during a congressional testimony that she didn't read the document before signing it. Tricia Anderson, the head of the Bureau's National Security and Cyber Law Branch and Principal Deputy General Counsel for the FBI, signed off on the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act (FISA) application before forwarding the document to then FBI Director James Comey. Despite not having read it, she said. Anderson's division was responsible for legal oversight of the FBI's FISA applications process and provided a final sign-off before the documents were sent to the Bureau's director level. Prior to signing this request, Anderson's division was also assigned the mid-year exam, the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. Despite not readily volunteering to reveal the information, Anderson admitted during questioning that she was personally responsible, at the Senior Executive Service (SES) level, for signing off on the original Carter Page FISA application. Mr. Breitenbach, you had mentioned earlier that all FISAs have to be signed off, have an approver at an SES level. In OGC? Or is that anywhere inside the FBI? Miss Anderson, in NSLB, in my particular branch. Mr. Breitenbach, in NSLB? Miss Anderson, yeah. Mr. Breitenbach, okay. Who was that SES approver for the Carter Page FISA? Miss Anderson, my best recollection is that I was for the initiation. In her August 31, 2018, testimony, a transcript of which was reviewed by the Epoch Times, Anderson described her role in the FISA process as a backstop whereby she would serve as a last check in the process to ensure that all necessary elements of the FISA package were present and that it met the basic requirements of probable cause. According to Anderson, the Department of Justice, DOJ, attached a cover note that identified potential issues, if any, for her to review with every FISA application. If no issues were identified by the DOJ, then according to Anderson, there would be no need for her to read the FISA application. If no issues were identified by the DOJ, then according to Anderson, there would be no need for her to read the FISA application. Miss Anderson, so, there typically would be a cover note that would summarize the FISA. That cover note is generated by DOJ. And because of the time pressures involved and the sort of very last stop in the process nature of the review, the SES review, that's done, I wouldn't read a FISA unless there were some sort of issue that was identified based on the cover note. Mr. Breitenbach, you are, though, reviewing for the sufficiency of probable cause, Miss Anderson, after many people have reviewed that assessment. And so, as I mentioned, this was essentially a backstop to all of the other processes and the rigor that had been applied by DOJ attorneys and by FBI investigative and legal personnel. Despite the FISA application's politicized nature and obvious sensitivity, it appears that no issues were identified in relation to it, as Anderson testified that she had not read the application, only the DOJ cover note. Mr. Breitenbach, does that mean you read the FISA, Miss Anderson? No. Mr. Breitenbach, okay. So you did not read the FISA, but you would have been familiar then with at least part of the FISA with regard to the legal predication for probable cause in the FISA in order to be able to sign it? Miss Anderson, I would be familiar based on the cover note, yes. Mr. Breitenbach, on the cover note. Okay. So, Miss Anderson, in the case of the Carter Page FISA, I was generally familiar with the facts of the application. Mr. Breitenbach, okay. Miss Anderson, before I signed the cover note. Anderson claimed that in the case of the Page FISA, her approval was more administrative in nature because all necessary approvals, including up through and including the leadership of the FBI and the leadership of the department had been obtained by the time the Page FISA came to her desk for sign-off. The Page FISA application relied heavily on allegations made in the so-called Steele dossier paid for by Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign and the Democratic National Committee. At the time of the FISA application, none of these allegations had been verified or validated by the FBI when they were presented to the FISA court in support of probable cause. and the Steele dossier remains unverified to this day. The dossier extensively cited a September 23, 2016, Yahoo News article by Michael Isikoff, which focused on Page's July 2016 trip to Moscow. This information, which was used by the FBI to corroborate the dossier, was provided to Isikoff by the author of the dossier, former MI6 agent Christopher Steele. The House Intelligence Committee noted that Deputy FBI Director McCabe testified before the committee in December 2017 that no surveillance warrant would have been sought from the FISC without the Steele dossier information. According to former FBI counterintelligence head Bill Priestap, corroboration of the Steele dossier was in its infancy at the time of the initial Page FISA application. Anderson admitted that the Page FISA process was handled outside of normal procedures, receiving early approvals from leadership officials at both the FBI and DOJ, including Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe and Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, prior to the document reaching her desk. Ms. Anderson, in this particular case, I'm drawing a distinction because my boss and my boss had already reviewed and approved this application. And, in fact, the Deputy Attorney General, who had the authority to sign the application, to be the substantive approver on the FISA application itself, had approved the application. And that typically would not have been the case before I did that. Before, I would usually sign the cover note on the FISA application. So this one was handled a little bit differently in that sense, in that it received very high-level review and approvals, informal, oral approvals, before it ever came to me for signature. And so, in this particular case, I wouldn't view it as my role to second-guess that substantive approval that had already been given by the Deputy Director and by the Deputy Attorney General in this particular instance. Anderson singled out the involvement of her former boss, FBI General Counsel James Baker, in the Page FISA review process. Anderson described Baker as one of the nation's leading experts on FISA. One of the best people you could possibly consult about what was contained within the FISA application. Anderson, while defending her handling of the Page FISA signing, claimed that Baker had personally reviewed and made edits to the FISA. However, according to Baker's October 3, 2018, testimony, he had only read a small portion of the Page FISA and specifically did not review the underlying Woods procedure file, which provided documentation for the accuracy of facts represented in the FISA application. Rep. Meadows, and did you read the whole Carter Page FISA application? James Baker, my recollection is that I read the factual part of the initiation of the Carter Page FISA. I am not going to say I read. Baker clarified that by factual part he meant that he had only read the probable cause section of the Page FISA. He also testified that he had asked Anderson to personally notify him when the Page FISA began moving through the system. Baker noted that he did not believe he reviewed the final document, stating the final would not necessarily have to come to me for approval. Contrary to Anderson's claim, Baker said that he was primarily relying on briefings from his staff, which presumably would have included Anderson in her role as head of the National Security and Cyber Law Branch, the specific legal division within the FBI that was responsible for the Page FISA. During his testimony, Baker admitted that disclosures regarding the role of DOJ official Bruce Orr and his wife, Nellie, had been unknown to him at the time of the Page FISA application. Orr was passing on information from the Steele and Fusion GPS co-founder Glenn Simpson to the FBI.